Despite Big Gary down the pub reckoning he could do a better job than your team's current manager, the managerial game isn't an easy one, and being good on the pitch doesn't necessarily mean you'll make a good manager. We've seen shocking footballers make good managers, we've seen brilliant footballers not even try and get into management, then there are those legends of the game who just couldn't get it right as a manager. Zinedine Zidane doesn't seem to be struggling with swapping his number 5 shirt for a luxurious suit, but then there's Frank de Boer, who despite being a fantastic defender, couldn't hack it in the Premier League according to Steve Parish, who sacked him after 4 games. Okay, not a great example, but let's look at 5 Premier League legends who failed as managers. Number 5, Tim Sherwood. As a player, Tim Sherwood's pedigree in the top flight was cemented by his captaincy of Blackburn Rovers during their title-winning season of 1994-95. In fact, Tim Sherwood is one of the reasons we didn't see Zidane in the Premier League, with Blackburn feeling that they didn't need the Frenchman when they had Sherwood instead. Although the latter part of his career might not have been as impressive, he was a prized asset when signing for Spurs in 1999, and even those who don't like his style can't deny that the man possesses a winning mentality. Sadly, his attitude to football coaching, along with the glory days of his career, might be stuck back in the 90s. He didn't win too many fans when he became interim manager at Spurs, playing a flat 4-4-2 which made it look like he was using some sort of default team selector in the dressing room. He also didn't make too many friends in said dressing room, openly slamming his players to the press after a defeat to Chelsea, something he was lauded for that foreign managers are just ridiculed for. And while he had a chance to impress during his spell in charge of Aston Villa, the excitement of their initial relegation battle and FA Cup run quickly descended into a farce when the team's fragility was exposed at the start of the following season. Simply put, a bloke who constantly got excused for his failures as a manager because of his passion, spelled P-A-S-H-U-N. Number 4, Stuart Pearce. As a route into management, taking on interim duties is a legitimate chance to shine in the event that a head coach should leave their position. Such a fate befell Stuart Pearce not long into his retirement as a player, taking over the reins at Man City after Kevin Keegan left his post, allowing him to step up from assistant coach all the way up to the top job. It wasn't totally new territory for Pearce, who had also taken on an interim player manager role during his time in Nottingham Forest, but sadly Psycho couldn't quite translate the ferocity he used to display as a defender into results for his team. After a familiar upswing in fortunes during his first few months as manager, City began to flounder under his supervision. It would prove to be his only attempt at management in the top flight, although another spell in charge of Forest did nothing to restore his credentials. A run of 3 wins in his final 21 games in the Championship saw him swiftly removed by the club's top brass. Pearce also led England's under-21 side for multiple years and the Olympic football team in 2012, neither of which bared any fruit, struggling to advance young English talent and failing to pick up a medal in London. Number 3, Tony Adams. Tony Adams was known as a leader on the pitch. His Arsenal career took in many honours, and his record of being the only player in English football history to have captained the team to league victory in 3 different decades is unlikely to be ever matched. Now boasting a statue outside of the Emirates, those qualities that made him excel in a back 4 don't seem to have helped him in his quest to successfully manage a football team. To date, the longest amount of time Adams has spent in charge of a club was at Wycombe Wanderers, his first attempt at management after retiring as a player. He took over in 2003 and the team relegated under his watch. He left the following year after only 53 games in charge. His longevity in a head coach role is almost half with every successive appointment since. He managed 22 games in charge of Portsmouth during an ugly spell for the club, 12 games in charge of Azerbaijan's Gabala FC, and most recently a run of just 7 games managing Granada, where he was brought in to keep the club in La Liga but failed to do so, with the club finishing bottom of the league. It's fair to say that his resume won't be doing the rounds in the Premier League anytime soon. Number 2, Gary Neville. They say it's easy to be a critic, which is exactly why we sit on YouTube and do it every day. But when it comes to assessing the performance of players, Gary Neville can't exactly be excused of not knowing what he's talking about. His playing days at Manchester United was glittered with trophies, and his reputation as an excellent reader of the game has made him a darling of the media as a sharp-tongued pundit. But when it comes to assessing the decisions of actual managers, recent experiences on the touchline should give the former Red Devil good reason to pause and reflect. Although he can't be charged with full responsibility, Neville's time as assistant manager of England coincided with some of the bleakest and most disappointing football the national team has ever produced at major tournaments. While Roy Hodgson took the brunt for the England debacle, J. Nev was front and centre in the spotlight when he became Valencia boss, where his team failed to keep a clean sheet in La Liga during his time as manager, winning only 3 of the 16 games for which Neville was in charge. A tenure that was summed up by a 7-0 defeat at the Nou Camp, Neville's time in Valencia almost got him on Spain's most wanted list. Stick to what you're good at, Gary, and that's making everyone look like a terrible pundit next to your good self. And number 1, Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer isn't exactly scared of the cameras. He's been sorting up the limelight ever since he first made a name for himself in the very early 90s. Never short of confidence, he scored a bucket load of goals in almost every season he spent as a Premier League star, going on to become the league's highest scorer and Newcastle's record goal scorer. So if anyone was qualified to handle the pressures and stresses of management, you'd think it would be him. Sadly, his only spell in management at his beloved Newcastle United did not quite go to plan. The Magpies had already been managed by Kevin Keegan and Joe Kinnear that season, with both leaving, and finally it was Alan Shearer who was elected to take on the responsibility of trying to save the club from relegation, with only 8 games left to play in the 2008-09 season. He ultimately fell short of the mark after a famous loss on the final day of the season at Villa Park, confirming their relegation to the Championship and the end of Shearer's foray into management. It seems unlikely that Shearer will give up punditry for coaching again anytime soon, and we don't blame you, Alan. We're going to stick to slacking people off too. Much easier. So those are 5 Premier League legends who failed as managers. Let us know of any more in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.